All right, so I'm live. This is my live stream, Joshua Kemble's live stream. For those of you who are new to it, by the way, I have like ink on my face. This happens when I'm inking. I just got finished doing Artcasters, which is our show that I do with Scott Strickland and Cryptokerr, and it was the first one hosted on Corey's channel. It was a really good episode. I encourage everybody to kind of check it out. And also because we just did Artcasters and we had kind of a lively chat there, I have no idea how many people will reroute to this stream, being that it was just something we kind of decided in the chats because I'm like, I'm not done with this panel. And I got a good headway on it as I was going, but I'm planning on kind of live streaming till I'm done. So who am I? I'm Joshua Kemble. I have a graphic novel called Two Stories. That's about faith and mental illness. That's 120-ish pages, hand lettered, hand inked, and then handed to you in print. And that's basically what I'm working on tonight is book 2. I also have an upcoming book called Jacob's Apartment. That's about the questions that can shake even the strongest of faith. It follows two characters, Jacob and Sarah, who are both young, sort of escaping different traumas of their childhood, and are slightly polar opposites, but wind up being roommates and finding common connection in their literary pursuits. And things get complicated as their dreams and pursuits start kind of interweaving with their waking and sleeping dreams, while also coming into, coming of age kind of scenarios like losing a family member to cancer and like sort of dealing with traumas and different kind of broken relationships and stuff like that. And so it's a pretty awesome graphic novel. It's coming out from Graphic Mundi. And so that's my other book, and that's coming out this May of 2022. And also, if you're new to this too, and you want to like actually meet up with me or a friend of mine who's actually been on Artcasters a couple times. Originally, I was going to booth at LA Comic-Con on the 3rd through the 5th, sharing the table space with Ken. Something came up with Ken, so Ken won't be able to booth, but that was Ken Mora, who's like also got a book out through Marcosia, which is the publisher who put out Two Stories. But since Ken dropped out, actually my friend Chris Kawagua will be joining and boothing with me, which is pretty awesome. And let's see what else. Oh, hang on a second. Got like one thing to do. All right. So anyhow, as I'm doing this, Cryptokerr will probably be joining. And sorry, I was actually messaging Chris because he said, "Oh, when I'm done, he's doing a drink and draw, which he does on Thursdays." And he was saying if he wraps up, he'll be joining us as well, which is kind of exciting. I need to get a new paper. Sorry, this is the most exciting intro to the stream, but I need to get a new paper. Like this is. Do you see all that smudgy stuff? That's just going to end up all over my page if I don't replace it. So I'm going to go grab that real quick, and then we're going to start rocking and rolling. So, yeah, should be fun. Paper. Oh, where are you, paper? There it is. Okay, I know that was like legendary streaming right there. That's like, we're starting a live stream and I'll be right back. So I had to get a paper. This is what I do with my papers. And voila, it's a fresh sheet of paper. This will be the clean side. This side will get smudged up by my fingers. And then I kind of fold it through, and then I eventually start using them as test sheets, just to kind of recycle. It's a weird little neurotic system us cartoonists have. So anyhow, I'm going to basically start working my way through inking this panel, which is like this first panel here for Two Stories Book 2, and just kind of hang out with you guys and chat and talk. So I kind of mentioned this on Artcasters, but I wouldn't call myself like a expert on hip hop or anything like that, but I do enjoy hip hop as a genre, and my preferences are always going to usually reside on like the kind of stuff that I got into in like the 90s and stuff. There's a lot of modern hip hop that I'm not really drawn to. And it's definitely not like the only music I listen to. I tend to listen to a lot of punk rock, indie rock, post-hardcore. I mean, it's all over the place. I like some jazz. I like a lot of different genres of music and stuff. But of like new hip hop, I've been really impressed by Kendrick Lamar. And like the first album that I got into of his was this album called Good Kid, Mad City. And it took me, like, I had a friend of mine who has similar tastes in hip hop, like, kind of recommend it. And so I was like, I tend to trust his suggestions. And so I like checked it out. And at first, I think the first song I heard was like Swimming Pools. And I didn't really know the context of the full album, like Good Kid, Mad City. So it sounded to me just kind of like cool, but almost trite. And so I was turned off by it at first. But then, like, my friend kind of convinced me. He's like, you got to hear the whole album, because he's like playing different characters, and there's like kind of a whole story arc to it. Like, so like track 1 like kind of introduces this like sort of narrative, and then it kind of progresses, and it has like stylistic changes in the music, and like the way that he, like, even within that song, like Swimming Pools, you know, there's like a part where he's kind of being like almost like a trite like like hip hop artist who's like just singing about drinking, and like, you know, you want to drink, like I got a swimming pool full of liquor, right? And it's a little like, but it's like self-aware, because there's like a point later in the song where like he comes in as his own conscience in a totally different voice, and then there's these different narratives and different hip-hop styles and stuff like that. So then I gave it a second chance, and I listened to it like more seriously, just kind of like from front to back, and then it just kind of clicked, and I was like, this guy's a genius. Like and so I've been a big fan of Kendrick since. And then he did an album after that that kind of did this more like funk thing, like, but I love like roots funk, and like it was just doing just really cool stuff. And again, it like kind of threw me off when I first heard it, and then like the more I listened to it, the more I was just like, this is brilliant. And so that was like To Pimp a Butterfly. And then he put out another album called Damn, with a period at the end, and like each song like kind of touches a different narrative based on like a single word. And I think he got like the Genius Grant or something. So it's like I'm not alone in thinking like the guy's a genius. But anyhow, so I'm a big fan of Kendrick Lamar. That's my long-winded way of saying that. And then Frank was saying in the chats, the Artcasters with Brent was a good one. If anyone missed it, catch the replay and send a link to that. That's awesome. So thank you for putting that link in the chats for everybody, so they can see what I was up to before this. And when Corey ends up coming on, you can kind of see what exactly he was working on, and like see the different stages of our art too, like at that point. But anyhow, so like, yeah, that's a little context to like where I'm coming from when it comes to Kendrick Lamar. Like, he's, for current hip hop, it's like one of the few hip hop artists I've like really gotten into that kind of reminds me of like the school of hip hop that I was really interested in when I did start getting into hip hop, like Tribe Called Quest and like early Nas and like Wu Tang, like 36 Chambers and Gang Starr, like these like more lyrically powerful MCs that were doing like a lot of rhyming schemes with like offbeat. Some of them were trying like these weird offbeat styles and like tempo switches and like very crazy wordplay and like pretty heady concepts and stuff. And it's just fun, awesome music. It's a great style of music. So Kendrick's like one of the few I've like really connected to, because a lot of the like kind of more like mumble core and that kind of stuff, like I haven't really connected with. So that being said, there's like an album that just dropped that had Kendrick on it, and he literally says "Top of the Morning" like 7 times, and um, it's just weird because it's like, and don't get me wrong, like Kendrick, one of the things I like about his stuff is he'll do something a little off and weird, and then you sit with it for a little bit, and you're like, oh, that's kind of brilliant. So I'm still waiting for that moment with this one, but he kind of just repeats it, and then just goes like, let's start this shit, and that's the so it became like a meme, I think, online too, but it's just like, it's been stuck in my head all day. So like I went to work and I literally was thinking like top of the morning, like over and over again. And even now as I'm live streaming, which reminds me, I actually need to I should probably be like drawing. That would be good, because that's the whole purpose of the stream. Frank, what are you working on, man? Did you enjoyed the episode of Artcasters? But anyhow, I'm also excited that Chris is going to be at the convention, because he has something. My friend Chris Kawagua, Sketchboy01 on the social medias and websites, and I think also Kitten Rivet, which is like his art that he does with his wife, Christina, who's also an equally awesome illustrator. So anyhow, he did a painting based on Jacob's apartment. And it was a long time ago when I was first working on it. And that art has just kind of sat there for a long time. And so when my publisher was talking about putting out something to, because I was like, hey, I'm going to be at LA Comic-Con. We have the release in May. Like, if you guys like want to do a promotional or something, I can hand it out to people, talk about Jacobs to get them to order the book. And they were like all on board with it. And so we're making this exclusive giveaway specifically for LA Comic-Con on the 3rd through the 5th. And it's going to have some of Chris's art on it of my character, which is kind of cool. And then, of course, like some information about Jacob's apartment. So I think it's kind of perfect that he'll be there. So if you come there, you can get like comics by me, and you can also meet Chris, and you can get him to sign the exclusive, and I can sign it too, because it's got like both our art on it. So it's like a nice little collaboration with a longtime friend and collaborator of mine, Chris Kawagua. So I'm really excited about that. Plus, I don't know if I've talked about this, but I always feel like, and then Frank said, G. Willikers Kendrick sounds edgy. And the thing I like about him is he's doing things that haven't been done effectively in hip hop before. And he's trying things, and like he does like interesting things, like where he'll speed and slow his voice, like through like modulation, like while rhyming. It's I don't know, he does like some pretty incredible stuff. And I will say, if you check out Kendrick and you're at all into hip hop, like there's just moments where I would just recommend, especially if you're like me and you like kind of like more traditional hip hop, you like MCs like Q-Tip or, I don't know. It's like it takes a little bit to get into Kendrick, and the key thing is to give like the full album a listen. Not that I have to convince anyone because he's huge, but it's just, I don't know, worth checking out. Frank said, I enjoyed it immensely. It's an episode that needs rewatching to refresh yourself how not to be super negative. Yeah, I agree. In fact, while he was dropping book recommendations, I realized like I don't often rewatch our episodes, because I'm on them, so I'm having the conversation, so I don't often revisit them. But there's occasional ones where somebody will drop so many gems of good advice and information that I'll rewatch them. And that was definitely one of them, where there were a lot of really good book recommendations and stuff. And I was thinking, I don't have time to write all these down. So I'm going to have to like rewatch that Artcasters and kind of get a lot of these books, especially if they're available on audiobook, to kind of listen to, because they'll have a benefit to me on my work and stuff. Because yeah, like conflict resolution, man, like that stuff is like, if you can get those skills down, it's going to help you a lot in life. And I've grown in them a lot through like reading a lot of books and practicing and like really consciously trying to improve in areas that I'm really weak in, with communication. So it's kind of exciting to see that, that, like, I don't know, it was a fun episode because, again, I think there were a lot of good resources and ideas in there. So Frank said, I just finished a sketch card. I was commissioned to do 3-card set of Wreck-It Ralph characters. That's awesome. That sounds great. My son actually really liked the sequel a lot to Wreck-It Ralph. Like, I think it's called like Ralph Breaks the Internet or something. He really enjoyed that. And I think one of my old classmates from Cal State Long Beach, I think, worked on that movie. He was a really talented dude, and like, what I didn't know when I was in art school was like he would like moonlight at art center. So we were going to Cal State Long Beach, and then he would find out where the art center students were meeting, like for drawing sessions. So like a lot of the animation students there would go to the zoo on a trip and like do life drawing or plein air painting. And he sort of just like went to those and kind of like sat in on uncredited classes. Like you just, ask the professor if he could just sit in the classes and kind of absorb information and stuff. And at least from my understanding, you'd have to check with him, but this is what I had kind of heard later on. And so he was doing like almost like 2 schools, one that he was paying tuition at and getting his degree at and getting through the BFA program, and then the other that he was just gleaning information and knowledge for no degree and making a lot of connections and contacts and really kind of like trying to get into the animation industry. But the one thing I remember too about him was like his drawing abilities were so good. Like he turned in assignments when we were like working on our BFA that like you could have put in a book and it would look like those like Pixar art books. Like he was just an incredible draftsman. So when I think he first got like he got like an internship at like Pixar, and I think like none of us that were in his class with him were like shocked by it, because he was just, it was like one of those things where like when we were in school, we just kind of knew he was going to do well in that, especially in animation. And I've heard that I think since then he's worked on a lot of Disney stuff. I think he works in story there. I don't know if he still does, but I'm imagining he does, because he's had credits in a lot of Disney films that I'll be like watching with my kid and I'll be like, oh dude, there's Jeremy. So anyhow, very inspiring guy. And then Frank said, I'm right, you're wrong, sounded interesting. Yeah, I think that title's just really catchy. Because who hasn't had that feeling where you're like, yeah, I'm right and you're wrong, like in a conflict. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I also have to break the habit of like checking my monitor when I'm looking at chats and just more looking at, I have like my chats pulled up in this direction too. So I need to almost like forget that computer screen exists. So I stop kind of looking this way when I'm talking during stream, but I'll get better at it. This is a relatively new setup. What characters are you going to draw from Wreck-It Ralph, dude? So I've definitely had an interesting week where, like I've mentioned this before, but I'm in this like scenario where I have to get a ton of work done on comics in like a fairly short amount of time. And so it's kind of more important than ever that I really just maintain output like at a high level and kind of also maintain my cool and sort of balance it with my life as much as possible, to sort of embrace the opportunities I've been given. And but I have to say, like the last day, like today, while I'm like in the zone, there was definitely a period this morning where I was feeling the sleep depth, and so I have to be cautious with that. I'm trying to kind of balance it out by making sure that I'm like napping and stuff. I also got a little too quick with this, so you'll see that smudging, which I'm going to clean up in a little bit. I was too quick on the draw with getting to my inks. But one thing I've also learned from inking for a while is like, you want to be as meticulous as possible, but also you don't want to be so tight when you're working that you're like frightened of making a mistake, because scared drawing like reads really weird. It's kind of like, even when you're drawing, it could have an analogy to like dates or something like that, where it's like people tend to be attracted to confidence, and there is something about a confident line in art that's, I think, similar. I'm not going to hit this territory because this is still drying, so I'm going to kind of switch gears and hit over here. But yeah, so the tough part with confident drawing, because I remember a long time ago in like art history classes where I would be you know, like I would be told like, hey, like stop being so tight, like in your drawing, you know, like loosen up. They'd like, you know, you're kind of like rendering an eyeball or something, and like your teacher comes by and like smacks you and goes like, come on, like loosen up. And I never understood that for a long time, and I always thought like I kind of took the wrong lesson from it. And I think when it clicked, it kind of made sense. But it is this flow state you get in with art where you don't want to kind of get out of that state, you know. You kind of need to retain that. So that's what I was getting at. But the thing that's nice about art is the more you do it, the more you gain confidence. And a lot of gaining confidence in doing anything is like you're going to kind of do it wrong. And that's sort of how you learn how to do it right. And then the next time you kind of learn better in like recognizing like where you did wrong and like kind of correcting. But a lot of the process, I think, of like learning how to do comics and how to draw and even honestly how to be published and how to navigate promotion and stuff. A lot of it's like you just kind of boldly start taking some risks and then you correct. Like, so you take risk, you try, you innovate, you correct for what's not working, you adjust, and then you risk again. And through doing that like over and over again, like you do end up with like a little more confidence in your work. And it's a fine balance, right? Because you also need to be critical of your own work to kind of improve or to like make good art. Because, but yeah, anyhow, that is me rambling there. I also wasn't imagining that I would start this off talking about why I like Kendrick Lamar. But anyhow, fun times. Let me see. I also think the strange things happens as you get kind of older. Where like you have to almost make like a conscious effort to pay attention to music, and then these other things happen with music, at least for me, that are really similar to comics. Like when I first got into comics, like most of the comics I was aware of were like contemporary modern comics. And then as I started doing comics more and more, you start learning about some of the history of comics and you start like digging back. And then you find all this like gold like buried in the past, you know. So like then sometimes you're like almost like you can kind of have the reverse where you start really getting into some of the past artists and you almost like lose touch with like anything that's happening in comics now because you're like busy enriching your history and like of the cartoonists who came before. So it's like this weird balance where you have to kind of make an effort to like stay in touch with what's current. You can't pay too much attention to what's current. That's definitely a problem a lot of young artists have too, where they'll like find a cartoonist they like currently and then they'll just mimic them as opposed to looking at who they were looking at and kind of like dissecting like who's that artist looking at, like what are the things I like about that artist that I can pull from as opposed to like the entire style. Anyhow, so but it is I find that with music too, where it's like I think when I was younger I thought I knew a ton about music, and then as I've gotten older I've started realizing like there's whole eras of history in music that I missed, like, you know, like I think this year was like the first year where I like deep dived into like The Damned, which is like a very quintessential punk band. Like them or hate them, you know. And yet like somehow I just had missed that train, and so like it was really interesting to kind of deep dive into them. You know, I thought that was a kind of fun experience, you know, like learning about some different, you know. Anyhow, so that seems to be happening more and more. For me with music, like I find myself often digging back rather than like looking forward when it comes to stuff, because like what's weird is sometimes when you dig back you can find more innovation than what exists right now, but the downside of it is you can kind of miss like these brilliant things happening like at this minute, you know, in music or comics or art or film. So yeah. And now our special guest, Cryptokerr.
Hey.
Live
from... and look what I can do. I can push this button and we can see my iPad. So I figured it out.
I love it. See, this ties into the thing I was just rambling about. Like you try, you fail, you iterate, you correct, try again, you figure out how to do it. That's like half of art and gaining confidence in art. And also figuring out computer problems for sure.
Oh man, computer problems drive me nuts.
Yeah. Oh man. So I was rambling about music, Corey, and like how like I connect less with modern bands. And I think it's kind of similar to like how I lose touch sometimes with like more modern comics.
Oh,
because
interesting.
quite often at this point I find myself like going on these wormholes because I've gotten to an age where I'm not like I was when I was 20 something kid, where I like know like the tip of the iceberg about a musical movement and I think I'm like a genius in it,
Yeah.
which is totally me. I used to be like a complete music snob. I thought I just had like total knowledge. And then I've gotten older and I've realized like I don't really know anything about music. Like I like punk rock and I know like the very tip of the iceberg of like the history of it. I like hip hop and I know like a very smidgen of like the great stuff that's happened through the course of like history with that. I like jazz and I don't know much about it. I like all these things that I don't know enough about. And so what I find myself doing more and more now, and this is for art too, is like kind of digging back into the history of it. But I was saying it's like this kind of double-sided thing where it's like I think if you're paying too much attention to current artists, you could potentially get influenced too much by like current trends, and miss like some of the great innovations that you could be using today, like stuff that like the people before us figured out and now we've forgotten again and we have to refigure out, or we just relearn who those people were.
Yeah.
But then you also run the risk of if you go too far back, you can miss all the cool current innovation now. But I was realizing I do that with music and even movies actually quite a lot, where I'll dig back rather than looking at what's current, just to try to kind of fill some of those gaps, because I just realize how much I've missed or didn't live through. I don't know. So I don't know if that sparks anything, but that's
it's interesting because I was talking to you about my buddy who does film, teaches film, and like talking to him, I remember saying recently, like my knowledge of film is like embarrassingly thin, just compared to his. I mean, he's referencing new, old, like foundational.
Yeah, probably knows the cinematographers on it. That guy.
Yeah, I mean,
he knows the credit list.
And I'm like, I liked that movie, but he was saying, nah, you've got expertise in other areas, with like comics and stuff. And then I think of like, I don't know like comics history very well, and like, I didn't have like enough like disposable income or access as a kid to like to really get into comics. I sort of did, like I sort of did in high school a little bit. Like I could buy one or two, but it was like a 30-mile drive to like the nearest place that sold comics.
Yeah, that would have been a deal breaker. Like I think that's something people should consider from our generation, where it's like I had the luck of like I had within very short bike ride, I was at a comic shop on Wednesdays, like
right.
So
I think it would have been way
makes
different.
a big difference.
I think it'd be way different. But I remember,
although that's back in the day where, at least in my area, there weren't friendly comic shops. You'd go in there and you'd kind of get schooled.
Mine was,
which is not the best business practice.
Mine was a head shop.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So it was, it was like you'd go in there and they're selling comics as a front for the cops so that they don't get in trouble for selling drugs. It's like, and so you go in there and there's all this like quote unquote tobacco paraphernalia, like wooden tobacco pipes and tobacco boiling water systems. And then they're like, yeah, the comics are in the back. They're next to the action figures. Like, you have to walk by all these like black light posters and go through like a beaded curtain.
Hey, like comics have seedy beginnings, like in a lot of seedy history. I mean, like all the indie cartoonists, a lot of those guys, I think I told you about this, but it's like R. Crumb and a lot of the Zap guys,
Yeah.
they got distro through drug dealers. They
Oh,
literally
right.
were like,
Yeah.
they were thinking about it. They're like, who has access to just like peddle our wares like all over the city? And then they were like, pot dealers. Like, so they partnered with them, and it's like, I think the dealers liked it because they're like, this is something I could sell and like not get arrested for. Like,
Right.
But it is interesting. So there's like even a reason why a lot of those early Zap comics were like kind of aiming themselves towards like druggies.
Oh,
I
interesting.
mean, one reason was like most of those guys were insane and on drugs. And then the other, you know, and it's like the 60s kind of like weird art movement where they're like, we should do acid and draw comics, man, which like to me sounds like a nightmare. It's hard enough to make comics. I don't know. But anyhow, yeah. Oh, and Frank was saying, so I need to contact drug dealers. I am not giving advice to contact drug dealers, you guys. No, do not do that. But like the head shops and like heavy metal, like a lot of that history, especially the indies, like has a ton to do with like weird, because comics were always like the outcasts, you know. And it was an industry that was started by bootleggers, like,
Yeah.
and so it's got a lot of like, which by the way, a lot of industry has that. That's not unique to comics. A lot of, I mean, didn't NASCAR start as like I think racing in general, like was like the whole souping up your car and stuff. I think a lot of that was during Prohibition, right?
I was gonna say a very bigoted remark that it's probably moonshine. You know, like, but it actually might be. You know, the I don't want to be anti-Appalachian American.
Hey, I don't think is moonshine like a word you can't use anymore.
No, I think it's fine. I just
Okay.
It's stereotypical to you know. I immediately jumped to the General Lee and Dukes of Hazzard and everything because that and NASCAR just in my mind go hand in hand.
I think they kind of do though. Like I think the I remember hearing like a thing a long time ago that was talking about the origins of like specific mods done on cars and stock car racing, and a lot of it was developed, like I think even the nitrous thing in a car was developed to like try to evade police when you were rum running.
Yeah,
like you know, which
I'll
is
tell
insane.
you. I'll tell you something that Adobe did recently that I thought was kind of cool that I found out today.
Like innovated so they could do bootlegging.
No, they because I never opened InDesign, but I opened it today to talk about master pages and paragraph styles and character styles, and they have changed the name of master pages to parent pages. And I was like,
wow.
yeah, that makes sense. Because like in programming, you have the terminology of like master slave relationships. But I'm like, yeah, I don't want to use that term. Like it didn't even cross my mind that that would be like weird or bad until I was like, parent child is way better. You know, like,
Yeah, that actually is really great. And of course everybody will flip out because, you know,
yeah.
like you can't be considerate of other people.
Right. Well, I was sitting there and I was like, why? Where are the master pages? Like I can't figure out. And then so anyway, we were like team teaching, and so it's like it seems like the parent pages are behaving the same way as I would expect the master pages. So maybe they just renamed it. And so we looked it up, and they're like, yeah, we renamed it because we realized that it was really racist. And I'm like, oh, good for you, man. That's great.
That actually is a good move, man. I've
And
heard the same thing about like master bedrooms, and I was like, yeah, that kind of,
oh yeah,
you know, that kind of. I mean, I grew up calling it that, so that would be hard to adapt to changing. Right. But I don't necessarily know if I disagree with that, especially if it has origins and like that, you know.
Yeah, I mean that's where the master of the house. I mean, I don't think the word master in and of itself is inherently linked to slavery every time because it used to be the person in charge, but also if there's words that do the same thing that don't have that connotation, use them. Who cares?
Yeah, and
I'm not gonna lose any sleep over not.
yeah, within reason, I think
Right.
like
Yeah.
there's some movements like, okay, so there was a high school team in my area. Oh man, I'm gonna make a lot of people in my hometown mad. But there was a high school called Quartz Hill High, and they had a mascot called the like their team was called the Rebels, and they had a mascot that was like Johnny Rebel kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they got rid of the Rebels, and a bunch of people who grew up with that high school were like, "But it's the Rebels." And I didn't lose any sleep over that.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I don't know. Is it really good for us, especially Californians? Come on.
It depends, man, because I really like rebellion.
I like rebellion. I just don't necessarily like it with that uniform.
Oh, I don't know if I'm not getting the connection. I think maybe.
So it was Johnny Reb. It was like but like not Johnny Reb like the British are coming Johnny Reb, like the rebels, like it was a Confederate soldier.
Oh, in California?
Yeah.
Why?
That's
Did
a good question.
Did California even exist?
But it was like the guy had like a straight up like Confederate costume and stuff. And so it was like the bad Johnny Reb, not the good one.
Yeah, good riddance, man.
So, yeah, I didn't really lose sleep over that. I was like, yeah, you can not call the team the Rebels and have like a Confederate soldier. That's fine with me.
I mean,
I'm not losing sleep over that, especially considering like a giant percentage of students who attend there would potentially be really offended by that. You know? So.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And reasonably offended by that.
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think we have to change everything, but I do think like people need to chill on all sides and try to be considerate of other human beings. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. Like if I'm eating somewhere where somebody doesn't like eat pork, like I'm not going to give them crap for it. Like if I'm eating at their house, I'm going to eat what they eat. I'll eat with them and kind of moderate with whatever. Like you want them to feel like that's my point. I want them to feel comfortable. Same thing. Like if I'm eating somewhere where somebody's a vegetarian and they are like really weirded out by me eating meat, I'd rather just not eat meat around them, and then I'll eat meat on my own.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rambling, but
yeah,
that's what this show is for, man.
This is the rambling show.
It is. And by the way, ramblers, we're going to get rambling, but also we do take super chats. I'm just going to start saying this on every stream, but we do take super chats. So if you guys ever at some point want to kick us some cash, Frank, don't, because you already did for our casters. That would be ridiculous to do it again. But yeah, if you guys like, kick in something, and like, especially if you want me to read something silly or absurd or whatever it is you want me to say, as long as it's not offensive to other people, I will happily read it on the show. Anyhow, go ahead, Corey. I'm just going to monetize us all.
I was going to say Adam's saying, I think master, boss, and ruler are all weird negative words. Yeah. There's not great histories. I read a book recently, and the point of the book was what the author was trying to say I really liked is like, it's not just specific situations. It's anytime any group of people has like unchecked power over any other group of people, it never is good.
Yes.
And it was a great book because I didn't agree with everything that it said, but like, I liked that point, which is like, you can get into the nitpicky of, who did this and who did that or whatever. But like the lesson we should learn from history is like, don't give any group of people total and complete unchecked authority over any other group of people. It's never good. It has never turned out well.
Yeah,
There's
it'll
never been
only turn out well when it's my group. I'm just throwing that out
right.
there.
My
And
group
that's
against the others.
history. That's history where it's like, oh, that was history. That was ancient history. And my group's going to do it different when we get
Right.
total power. No, I don't think, I also don't think you're necessarily the greatest boss if you have to like pull boss.
Yep.
Like, I think the more effective authority has actual power, and actual power doesn't need to be said half the time.
Yeah.
And I found that as a parent, like I rarely have to resort to like, well, I'm a dad and I'm your dad and I say so, so you need to do this. I have had moments, very few, where I did, and I felt like I lost at that point.
Oh yeah.
Every time I've had to, or I've ever fallen into resorting to that, like 5 seconds after I say it, I go, that was stupid. Because it's not that's just not a good authority move, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. As soon as you do that, it's like, oh, okay, well.
Well, and then like tying into our conversation that we had on Artcasters, it's like you'll get compliance, but it's not the kind of compliance you want, you know? Like, yeah. That's why like dictators have to like have like a stranglehold on their people, because the second they don't, like people will kill them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. As soon as that goes away, it's over.
Yeah. No one's being loyal to them out of love.
Yeah.
Or maybe like one strange guy.
I just listened to the most interesting debate.
Ooh. Okay.
You would love this. It's 90 minutes.
I'm a nerd for debate, so I might.
No, you are a nerd for debate. You're also a nerd for literature. And so this is the Joshua Kemble trifecta of entertainment, because it also, okay, so here's what it is. And I'll tell you why I say trifecta. It is a debate between two authors who are defending whether 1984 or Brave New World is more prescient in today's day and age, with BBC actors acting out parts of the books as part of the argument.
Interesting.
So you've got the theater, you've got the literature, and you've got the debate.
Okay, but you need to link this to me.
Oh yeah,
on,
I will.
On Facebook Messenger or something, so I don't forget to check it out.
Yeah,
because that sounds amazing.
It was so good, because I just finished reading Brave New World. I didn't even know anything about Brave New World or Huxley or anything, and I actually think I prefer it to 1984, though. I think the argument they were trying to make of like, is it one or the other? In my opinion, it's when you go with like politics, we are much more 1984. But when you go with society, we are much more Brave New World.
I think both make interesting, compelling points. You know, Brave New World definitely ties more into media manipulation for sure. I think more effectively and more of the modern approach. Whereas I think 1984 is more kind of like going for like a almost like a, you know, Germany in World War II kind of propaganda technique.
Right.
Both are interesting forms of propaganda. One's like sort of like convincing you that it's in your best interest. The other is like getting you to comply and change your language so that you don't even know what your best interest is.
Well, the one is we have eliminated it all. We've eliminated everything except for happiness, and so everybody's happy all the time.
Yeah.
And the other is you're miserable, but we're going to take away language that gives you the ability to recognize your misery or define it or talk about it. And we're going to make you believe in the state. And so one is very much, you know, totalitarian governments. You know,
one is like almost like a corrupted democracy that's still slightly democratic, but it's completely manipulated.
Right. And the other one, the other one is like anyway, it's just really interesting because the arguments that they made were fascinating. They talked about media manipulation. They talked about Twitter. They talked about like
Antidepressants? Did they mention antidepressants?
yep, a soma, right? And alcohol and other numbing behaviors and things. But the argument that I really liked is in Brave New World. I've got to stop talking and start drawing. But in Brave New World, they condition the children from an early age to in their sleep to like and dislike certain things. So, like for flowers and books, for example, certain classes of people, they're like they show them flowers and books, and then they give them an electric shock. They do that like 200 times, and then like they keep those for the rest of those lives. For the rest of their lives, those people will just scream and run away if they see like a rose or something. And his argument was, I mean, neurologists have studied your phones to the point where it is the same like sexual or drug induced release that you get from like notifications on your phones, to varying extents, but it's the same chemicals in the same area of the brain and everything. And he's like, so aren't you being conditioned by big tech? And I was like, oh man, it's so good. Anyway, it was really interesting. Good. It was a very good debate, and both sides made really interesting arguments. It was fascinating to listen to.
Okay, this is not. I'm not trying to derail you, but you
No,
just
you
reminded.
should, I don't have anything good to say.
Okay, well, no, I like what you're saying.
I know,
but like you said, big tech, and it reminded me of a thing that I heard recently. And this isn't to criticize that because I've used that term too. But it was an interesting thing where it was talking about. I think it was like a deep dive into kind of explaining like how the whole QAnon phenomenon started and stuff like that.
Oh, was big tech a Q term?
No, but they had like some experts like talking about movements like that and how to recognize them, like so you don't get like sucked down the rabbit hole of like these kind of conspiracies and stuff. And one of the telltale signs was like the word big. So they were like, if somebody's saying like big pharma, big tech, big government, big whatever, like 9 times out of 10 there's a conspiracy theory. And I was like, holy crap. Because I even realized when I even start speculating on conspiracy, I usually use those terms myself, where I'll be like, oh, it's big. Like I use big tech a lot. I'm like,
is it a conspiracy when it's like under current investigation from the U.S. Congress on
no, but like all conspiracy theories, right? Like they usually have a basis in fact, and then you have total realities. Like there is like a giant. There are these giant megalith companies in tech that have like really curiously disturbing power over the psyche of the people.
Yeah, and I agree with you, but also tobacco, oil, and technology, or at least Silicon Valley, are all terrifyingly unchecked.
Oh yeah, and like I agree, but it made me like it was interesting hearing that because I've used the word big tobacco too, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I realized I got to get away from using that because anytime I hear, I'm not saying you are this, I'm just saying anytime I hear hardcore conspiracy theories, they'll use that as a way to hedge you in. They'll be like, there's big tech and big pharma, and you're like, yeah, that's true, and they're like, okay, therefore, and then you're like, wait a minute. When you say big tech and I say big tech, I think we're thinking something different. Like, I'm not necessarily thinking the Illuminati here, and so it's anyhow. I thought that was just an observation that I was like, I'm going to try to kind of work on that myself in a big way, and make, but that might be part of my like big comics conspiracy too.
Yeah. You think the mega conglomerate corporations of Warner Brothers and Disney might not have comics interest at heart? the telecommunication companies that own some of our most endearing characters from our childhood maybe might be money grubbing, horrible, conspiracy theories driven things. Yeah,
Well, one of the things I love about that too, right, with comics is whether there's a conspiracy or not, like I I always draw a line between and I think you agree with me on this. I think there's a difference between the profit motive in business, which is kind of essential, right? For like at least in the current monetary system we have, right? Where it's like you need to be kind of profit driven to succeed as a business, even if it's like a minor amount of profit, you have to be making profit to kind of continue. And then the profit motive where it completely fights against the interest of human beings, you know, that's like this weird fine line.
right.
And I always like have trouble with that. So I have no problem with like, to me, it's like it's probably good that indies exist because those can kind of exist in like more niche territories. But
Yeah.
it's also probably good that like Warner Brothers, when they're owning a property, they're going to pursue profit. Like a lot of the time, that might actually be good. Like they might make really good decisions about characters, about story arcs. They might like pay more attention to the fans. That's in theory. It doesn't always work that way. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was also talking with somebody recently who was like all on board with the Marvel movies, and he started to get kind of burnt out. Just because he was like, I don't want to have to watch like 20,000 movies to like know what's going on.
Right. And now it's not even that. It's like 20,000 movies and 5 TV series. And, you know,
And
there's like all kinds of stuff.
and I was
And
basically
some of the
telling him like,
movies,
well, welcome to comics, man.
right.
Because like,
Welcome to a
like,
big summer comics event.
well, I mean, like, because I remember growing up, like, one of the things that got me out of superhero comics was that, like, stupid asterisks on every single issue of Spider Man, where I had to buy 10 other issues of Spider Man that had different variations, like spectacular, amazing, like, you know, Spider Man, regular Spider Man, amazing Spider Man. And, like, you know, you'd be reading, like, you'd be following one of the arcs, you know, as a kid. And it's like, as a kid, you have a limited budget for these things. And I'd be all excited. I'm like, oh, this is an issue with Venom. And then it would be like, see Amazing Spider Man #5 to understand what's happening in this part. I'm like, oh, crap. Now I got to go buy that. So then I go buy that. And then it's like, I wish I had #5. It was probably more like number 400 at the time. But you'd have to like buy like 20 issues just to understand what was going on in the plot. I feel like that is one of the tough things with comics, you know, the more like intense those story threads get. But also, I'm a complete consumer of it because, like, for instance, Book of Boba Fett, I'm going to watch that. I can't not watch that, you know. Star Wars is that kind of universe.
That's definitely, I'm definitely watching that. I have been reading so many indie comics lately that I kind of forgot about the whole thing, and I started getting into Donnie Coates, his run on Venom. It's so good, but it does because it's a Marvel thing, and so like in the middle of it,
Wait. He's writing Venom.
yeah, not Ta-Nehisi, Donnie.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay. I
very
was thinking
very different
Chinese.
guy. Donnie's interesting. I don't know what his background is, but I know his background involved a lot of substance abuse.
Oh,
And
you talked about this, yeah, on the last thing.
yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
but anyway, he was a guest on. I'm on Scott Snyder's, not Zack Snyder, but Scott Snyder.
Thank you for clarifying that because I've confused that in our past
I know.
conversations.
I'm on Scott Snyder's Substack writing class, and he just had Donnie on, and I haven't listened to this one yet, but yesterday he had Jim Zub. So he's bringing all these guys. Anyway, long story short, I'm reading it and it's like, and if you want to know what this is referring to, go read this other like four issue run of this different comic book. And I'm like, oh, I forgot how much I hate that. It's like it's fine, but it's also like,
And I mean,
when you read Invincible, you just get Invincible. When
yeah,
you read like, when you read East of West or Manhattan Projects, that's what you get. You don't have to like go to. It's kind of my problem with like Lost.
yeah,
There was a lot of stuff actually explained in Lost, but not in the TV show. It was like, because I remember I didn't really watch it because it bugged me, but like my wife was watching it, and
yeah.
I would just
I
like,
fell for it and got hooked on it for a long
it was
time.
very interesting, but I don't like being required to show up at a specific time. I never
Yeah,
have,
yeah.
and so I don't like media controlling my schedule. So I've always kind of resisted that, even as a kid. Um, if I'm there, I'll watch it. But if I have to be there, it almost turns me off. But anyway, so I would like do all this internet research to try to figure out what's going on. She's just watching the episodes, and it's like, oh, this episode, this thing is explained if you play this video game and you go into this room and then you
Ah,
type in the code and the door opens and this is written on the wall. And I'm like, how are you supposed to know that? Like, like how are you? But it was like there was tons of stuff like that where it still didn't make any sense because they were like black boxing it and didn't have an end and they didn't know where they were going. They were just asking a bunch of questions, but they tried to answer a bunch of those questions in other source material. I'm not even exaggerating, like cereal box promotions,
yeah,
and like it was like all over because it was a huge phenomenon.
yeah.
and
I
it,
remember.
and so they were giving you answers in the most random places, but it wasn't like there was like a commercial break that was like, hey, go check out Cheesy Puff cereal for the clue in today's thing, like they would do in like the 80s cartoons.
Yeah,
They just hoped you would stumble across it. So it
yeah. And
shouldn't
then
make any sense.
and a lot of the answers, and that's like one of the formulas I think that's criticized about that show is like it answered with new questions everything. And so it
Yeah.
was like very good until they got to the point where they had no more uh, questions to continue on. And then you realize, like, at least for me, I felt kind of gypped because I was like, a lot of these threads that seemed like they were going in compelling places, like, were just sort of bait.
Oh yeah. Well,
um,
that's one of my favorite shows. Is exactly like that too. I just have to ignore the last two episodes. The reboot of Battlestar Galactica. So good. So many interesting threads. And almost a very similar ending where it's like, there's these unexplained godlike people that are kind of godlike.
I
Like,
love it.
we might call them Machina. Deus Ex even. And it was like,
Yeah.
come on, that's it? That's the thing? That's what we're doing right now?
Yeah. By the way, there's a machine that these gods made, and if you
Lowers
pull the
itself in
lever, and
chain.
you're like, wait, you're actually just making the god machine, like. Anyhow, yes. And by the way, it was all a dream too. And you're like, wait, what? No.
Yeah.
No, actually, it's just they're in heaven. Wait, what? No, every cop out you can think of, except they didn't have the refrigerator. Um, the refrigerator was probably the worst cop out I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
I
Have you
think they
watched
even said that like exploding the fridge might even replace Jump the Shark.
uh
They did those people.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have you watched Battlestar Galactica?
I absolutely loved it up to the last episode, and I feel polar opposite about that than Lost, um, because I feel like, and honestly, I kind of feel similar to Lost, but I feel like that was so good for so many episodes that some of the like crappy plot thread tying that they attempted at the end, where it kind of fell
Yeah.
apart, was kind of okay. Like for me, it was forgivable. because the series is still just so perfect
It is so
up
good.
until that like last 2 episodes, you know.
Yeah, it is very, very good, but there's so much about Starbuck and the stupid song and paintings that you're like, come on.
Yeah, it
That
really
was so
started
much
falling
cooler than you made
apart.
it up. Yeah,
Yeah,
it unraveled pretty hardcore.
yeah, but it was so good initially. And I love how they really leaned into like the naval, like, well, I can understand why you would like Battlestar too, because we were talking on our last stream about how much you um, like Master and Commander and like a
Oh
lot
yeah,
of those sea, and like that was one of the brilliant things about the angle they took, where they were like, no, we're actually going to make this like a sea ship, you know.
right.
Even
And
the
there's
war was like very like naval.
yeah, and that's a they did it really well, but that's a fairly common thing in a lot of sci-fi.
Yeah, yeah.
For whatever reason, they're like, it's a ship, it's a ship. So we'll just keep instead of it being the Air Force, it'll be the anyway. Have you watched Space Force with Steve Carell?
Um, no, I need to.
It's
I've
funny and a little bit endearing, but the thing that I find entertaining is like they have these like this gym bro guy who's like a total like jock meathead, and he's the guy in charge of the Air Force, and his argument for the Space Force being under the Air Force instead of the military or the Navy is like, it's air. I'm in charge of the air. And everybody's like, it's actually a vacuum. I don't I don't think that really can. So they have this like really entertaining discussion of like whether it should be Air Force or Navy or military or its own thing. And it's just where the guy is like, anything that's not on the ground is the air, and I get the air. I claim it. It's mine. I
That's
like
pretty
that.
hilarious.
I thought that was good.
Oh
All
man.
right, I've got to draw something simple and quick.
Was there a prequel show? Caprica. Okay.
Caprica, man, that was very interesting, and they just abandoned it. I don't think it had the ratings, but it was a good show. I did like where they were going with it. Caprica, there was a couple of the spin-offs. I'm not a big horror fan, but one of those mini series that they did, um, it was like the kind of in between of the Cylons experimenting on trying to make the human version of Cylons.
Hmm.
And so you saw like these like Borg like things, but they were like, I don't know. It's gross. I didn't like the grossness of that so much, but yeah, there a lot of the stuff that surrounded that was good. I liked that show so much. Actually, I have never been able to find something. I wish I had more money because when they struck the set, um, they went out of they sold all the props and stuff, and like I don't like collecting things for the sake of collecting, but I like collecting originals. I don't like collecting like this issue of this thing that I'm gonna slab and not read, but like an original page or whatever. And I have like cells from like Little Nemo cartoon. Like I've got actual animated cells. I've got a storyboard from like He-Man.
Mhm.
Um, and I really would have loved like an actual prop, but like it came out when I was making like $32,000 a year, and I didn't have the money to do much, because I
I
was
feel like that kind of
stupid with my
collect.
money too.
Yeah, I think I don't know. Did we have the conversation about slabs on the last stream, or was that a stream I kind of did yesterday? I can't remember.
I think we did talk about it at some point.
Okay, because somebody in the chats had asked me about how I felt about like collectors and slabs, and my general outcome was like, dude, like I'm all for geekdom in general. So if you're like a collector and that's how you enjoy comics, cool. I fall
Yeah,
more on the side of being a reader, but I also empathize because like I totally have like a collector in me. Like I enjoy like for instance, I really love um The Wind in the Willows, the Disney Wind in the Willows.
Uh-huh.
I just think that Mr. Toad is amazing. And the first time I was able to acquire like a decent little Mr. Toad sculpture, I totally got that just because like it's awesome. It's like it's something I want. If I could have like a piece of Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at my house, I would be wanting to jump at that opportunity. There's a lot of things where I would like be a complete nerdy collector. Another is comic pages or original art. Like if I had the time, inclination, and budget, I would probably be purchasing more original pages,
Oh yeah.
Because I just love it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and original pages are so good.
Yeah.
It's like it's hard to beat. Even reprints at size of pages are not as good as like the originals, but it's hard because I kind of had to pull back. There's a guy I want to have on Artcasters that's like an original page collector, and he's got the coolest collection. He'd be really fun to talk to.
That's awesome. Yeah, so I get like collecting art and stuff. I just tend to be more utilitarian with my love of comics, where like even a comic where I'd want to buy like a special edition that maybe I want to treat really well. Maybe in theory I would want to slab. I would want to have read it, and I would want a copy that I could read.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's. But anyhow, my point was I relate to your collecting thing with wanting original parts to I mean, dude, I would if I could have like some prop from Back to the Future.
Right.
I mean, are you kidding me? I would love that.
I've got to point out, this is the first time I've tried to do something like this. I bought this, and so these are like insects encased in resin.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of using photo reference that you can find on the internet,
careful, Frank might get hungry. Him and Anna. I'm joking. If you guys want reference or context to that, Frank, that's your cue to drop the bug eating episode link for people in the chats.
But instead of doing that, I'm going to see if I can use my own thing and not photo reference. But it's going to be a little bit difficult since I have to hold up this magnifying glass to use the reference. But anyway, it's kind of fun. There's some fun stuff. I'm actually going to do a video soon about physical things and the value of physical things versus digital things. Because I was listening to Jake Parker just did a video where he was talking about like getting off the internet and looking at things in books. And I thought, that's actually a really good idea, because there's some really good value in doing that. And so anyway, long story short, why is this not?
I heard one of the most compelling when I was on that now I'm blanking out. Oh my goodness. The Comics Garden show that I was on.
Yeah.
I was given one of the best arguments I've heard for ebooks, and I'm kind of surprised I hadn't heard it in the whole digital versus physical books debate as often. Where it was just like moving, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that does make digital books seem really cool.
Yeah.
That was the only argument I needed to hear. I was like, because at the age I'm at, if I had to move to another house, I might consider just going to digital books, because our moves are like 50 times more complicated because of our bookshelves, our massive amounts of books, all the comics,
Oh
They're
yeah.
hard to store, like they're hard to keep in boxes, like they collect a lot of dust, like which is actually one of my favorite things about books. But it's like, yeah, but like the moving thing, I was like, okay, you almost have me won just by saying moving on the ebooks. Although I still can't stand reading comics digitally. I don't dig it.
It's way better on a 13-inch iPad.
Yeah, I mean on a tablet I can totally see, but still, you know.
Yeah, but on a computer screen or a phone or even a smaller tablet, I hate it. But it is so good. That's interesting. It's so good on a big giant iPad.
I guess, but I still like the physical book. I'm not saying it's any less. Well, I guess for me it is less. Like I don't like it as much as physical books. But I can
No,
understand, like, you know, when they were making the case of like, hey, look, I have like 20 long boxes of comics on my tablet. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Because
yeah,
that's a lot less of a pain than like organizing and storing 20 long boxes, you know.
right.
So I did. Anyhow, I was surprised because that's usually something I'm very much a stickler about, but just for that alone, I was like, okay, that makes a pretty compelling case for like ebooks, you know?
Just look at what Gaz is doing lately, and you're like, oh yeah, that seems terrible. You know, that does not sound fun.
Oh, you have to catch me up on it. Maybe I didn't see the
Oh,
latest.
he's
His
moved.
move? Oh
He's
yeah.
moving, and he just keeps posting like little updates of like his toy collection getting moved and his
Yeah.
comic book collection getting moved and his books, and he's got like, his new place looks incredible, like the way he's got it all set up. But it's also like it's got to be dozens of hours of work just to relocate that.
Yeah, I just the age I'm at, like moving is not a pizza endeavor. It's something I only do for very close friends or family. Yeah.
Yeah,
Whereas
I
like
mean, like,
before, I used to be like, if somebody was an acquaintance and they were like, "Hey, you want to come over and move? I'll give you beer or pizza or something," I'd be like, "Yeah, let's do it."
yeah,
Now I'm like, I mean, I'll still help people out, especially if they ask, but I'm way more hesitant and not happy about it.
well, yeah. I mean, at this point, it's like I was Frank taking off.
Frank's out. Have a good one.
Yeah, at this point, I'm like, I told my wife recently, I was like, this most recent move, I was like, honey, we're like old enough to where let's save up money so we can pay movers, like, or like have at least paid help or something. Cause I did at one time where, right, I just mentioned casually to a coworker, I was like, dude, I'd give somebody $1,000 to not have to move. And he's like, dude, I'll move you for $1,000. And I was like, are you serious? Because I will give you $1,000 right now if I don't have to move my whole house. And that might have been the best $1,000 I've ever spent. And it was a ton of money at the time, and it still is. But at the same time, I think actual movers cost like $3,000 to $7,000. And
And
so I was like,
they're not going to be as like careful with your stuff as like somebody who knows you, who might have to like see you at work like a week later.
right,
Because a lot of movers will just like break your stuff and be like, "Sorry,
yeah,
yeah, you know, you had a really nice cabinet there, and now you have lumber,
right.
but you still owe me money. And if you want me to pick up that lumber, you owe me more money."
Yeah, I don't know. I've never actually paid professional movers, but I feel like
Yeah,
they would.
we had to hire movers once, and that's one lesson I learned was like be really careful because they would literally like, I mean, half our stuff was just like, I mean, this was like apartment era, um, but half our furniture was just completely demolished in the move.
That has to be. That can't be a thing that still happens. I would imagine there's got to be insurance, and they would be
It's
on the hook, right?
just be careful when you're hiring movers and pay a lot of attention to what you sign.
Oh my gosh, that's awful. That seems terrible. I think my idea of doing this quickly coupled with my idea of using, like 1/2 inch wide physical reference, it's not a good idea. One of those things has got to go. This is so small. I wonder if I could. I'm going to take a picture of my magnifying glass with my phone so I don't have to keep squinting at my magnifying glass.
That's always a good route. This is going to be fascinating to see this magnified bug.
I don't know if it'll be any good because I'm trying to do it quickly, but
I'm
also not good at doing things quickly.
Yeah. So if one of those bugs happens to be Gregor Samsa, what would you call that?
Inception Metamorphosis.
I was just trying to bait you to have to use your favorite word, Kafka-esque.
Oh, right. I like it
because that might actually be the one section where that would be like a completely appropriate,
Yeah. The human eye is pretty dang amazing. Every time I try to take a picture of something I'm looking at, I'm like, why is it so much smaller in the camera than it is in my eye? And it's like, oh, my eye is just not noticing the rest of that stuff.
Not noticing the rest of what stuff?
Check out how cool that is.
That is incredible.
That's rad. All right. So I'm going to stop squinting at this now. Okay. That's much better.
All right. So I am pretty excited about this making progress. And you know what? This might actually be potentially the one stream that I've done starting it being like, this will be fairly quick, and it might actually be fairly quick.
Oh, that's cool.
I have no idea.
That is very exciting.
Who knows?
I don't, apparently, since it's already almost 2 a.m. and I just barely started sketching.
Oh my goodness. Well, I might hang there with you. I don't know. We'll see where we're at. I'm actually realizing why I'm starting to feel a little laggy is I usually take a little break at like the 1 hour mark, and it's been 1 hour and 20 minutes, and I've been enjoying our conversation so much I forgot to do that stand-up stretch.
You're like clockwork with that.
Yeah, I usually am. And it's funny, my body knows when I haven't done it.
Yeah, that's what I find really interesting is you'll say, "Oh, look at that." like it kind of sneaks up on you. Look at that. I just did a thing and it's this time.
Well, it's mainly because I literally get like back pain, and just crampy stuff. It's at work too, like where I'll get up and like I have to take like a second to just stand up and like move for a second,
Yeah.
Which is an interesting thing, but I think it's healthy to do though.
Oh yeah, no, it definitely is.
Will hopefully prevent some of what's coming for us all. And that was my stream. That was the most pleasant thing I can say. We're all going to decay, you guys. On a bright note.
A bunch of my colleagues who are older than we are, I walked up to them talking today at an event. And they're like, "Oh, you don't want to be here right now. We're just talking about old man stuff." I was like, what do you mean?
You like pull up a chair, you're like, "Yes, let's talk about this."
I'm like, I don't know. I feel fairly broken lately. I think I might be able to contribute to this conversation. But it was pretty funny. Some of them are like pre-diabetic and other things, and then they're talking about. I was like, oh man, that sucks. There's so many different things that can go wrong physically.
Yeah, and inevitably one of them will.
Right.
So enjoy your day, you guys. I'm just kidding. But I think it is a good thing to be aware of as we're like experiencing life and stuff. I think like the cool thing is, man, having functional anything is a gift.
Yeah.
And I think like it's important for us to try to remember that sometimes.
Hey,
I sometimes will remind myself that it's kind of a blessing to be breathing, and that's like a thing in its own. Like that's kind of a thing a lot of people don't have.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a good thing to have.
Okay, here is my
What do you got?
first world complaint of the day.
Oh, I don't know if these are first world complaints because you have some like legit like beyond first world complaints recently, Corey.
This one is legitimately a first world complaint.
Okay.
I have switched over from the software that I've been using, which is Autodesk Sketchbook. I've switched over to Photoshop and Fresco. I really like Fresco.
Yeah, I've been noticing that you seem to be using that more recently.
Yeah,
is it because of the brush emulation or?
The brush engine is great. The file system is good. The coloring is better. But here's my problem. My problem, and I like that it just saves everything to the cloud. And so if you get on your desktop or your laptop or your iPad, your file is just there and it just opens. I just had to switch to the desktop version of Photoshop because because the iPad version doesn't have the mirroring that the desktop version has, and then the Photoshop doesn't have the ruler guides that Fresco has, and the iPad version of Photoshop doesn't have the mixer brush that is the pencil engine that I like. And so I have to use 3 different pieces of software to do this now, and two devices. Like I've got to jump back and forth through my desktop and my Cintiq and my iPad just to do. And I'm like, come on, guys, you're all the same company. Stop being so stupid. Anyway, it's driving me nuts because I love.
Well, it'll keep that CC subscription. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I love so many things.
That's probably the purpose to make them.
Yes, it's driving me crazy.
Honestly, though, I mean, I'd like to be a little critical and think that's why they're separating it, is just to make more money. No. But in reality, each one of those programs takes up so much RAM, and like if they did combine all of those programs, your computer would probably crash like immediately.
Well, here's what I really think it is, because I sometimes have conversations with the chief engineers of the different Adobe teams. Just because I, as an educator, I kind of have access. And they are one of the most siloed companies ever. And so like the Photoshop guys don't talk to the Illustrator guys, and the Illustrator guys don't talk to the InDesign guys. And like,
it's like the CIA FBI rift. Like,
yes, yes. And literally some of them don't even speak the same language because a lot of it is outsourced to other countries. And some of those teams aren't even in the same country. And so it's like, oh, there's so much. The biggest example.
Hold up. Okay, I got to pause because I it's past an hour. I got to break for a second. Right. I do want to hear this. So pin what you got, or you can continue with the chats as well. But I'll be right back in like about 10 seconds because my back's starting to rot.
Yeah, I was saying the biggest thing for me is when Photoshop announced that, hey, there's no reason for you guys to have to hold shift to constrain proportions, when most of the time when you're resizing something, you want the proportions constrained. And so now you can hold shift just when you don't want to constrain proportions. And everybody was like, oh, it's amazing. And then nobody else did it. Like Illustrator didn't do it, InDesign didn't do it. And even parts of Photoshop, you still do have to do it sometimes and not others. It's like it was a great idea, and then they didn't follow through, and so now I have to push shift sometimes in some software and not shift at other times in other software to do the same thing. And this each software package is built by the same company. I'm like, why don't you make this the same? Like all of your users are using multiple apps from you, and you are making us jump through the dumbest hoops. Anyway, there's my first world complaint. It's a stupid complaint, but it is what it is. Is that a tongue? I think that might be a tongue. Interesting.
All right. What did I miss, Corey?
Oh, just me talking about shift, constraining proportions.
Did you announce the takeover of my channel like I did on yours?
Yeah, totally. Did you do that? I didn't know.
I did. Just for a second, I was like, I have now taken over. Because it was funny when you disappeared on our live stream last time. Like, it was like right after talking like some smack about Facebook and like social media companies, and then it just goes. And so I was like, yeah, so I just want you guys to know I'm part of Big Tech, and I've taken over Corey's channel. But I didn't say anything that'll get you demonetized or anything.
No, you should. You should really take advantage of that when that happens.
Our friend of the streams, like, I swear, I almost feel like, yeah, I got to get that sticker thing going with the channel at some point. I heard something about that with YouTube, but I feel like if I do, Ronnie's owed something. He shows up on like every live stream. Ronnie Gunter, and super awesome, very talented horror cartoonist, and runs a show with another friend of Artcasters and the show, Jason Alexander. And you guys should be subscribed to Comics de la Muerte if you're into, like, obviously if you're like underage, don't, because it's horror. But yeah, check it out. They talk about like horror in comics and in film and stuff, and it's pretty rad. And we're also, I'm sure I mentioned it, but we're joined by Adam, who comes to a lot of streams too. So who's a good cartoonist in his own right. You guys should be following him. Welcome, you guys. How are the comics coming? Adam, when are we going to see? You were very close to publishing your comic. What's going on with that? I want to know. And now I also want to know. So you were talking about like the problem with the communication between the two social, or not social, Adobe programs, and how like sometimes they're located in different areas.
I was talking about, how when Photoshop, when they recently were like, hey, constrained proportions, now you can just not hold shift, and everybody's really excited, but then they didn't change it in InDesign or After Effects or Illustrator. I was like, why would you do it in part of one piece of software and none of the other ones, when like 85 to 90% of your users are using multiple pieces of those? It's like, if you're using Photoshop, you're probably also using Illustrator. If you're using Illustrator, you're probably also using Photoshop. Like,
anybody not using Adobe Illustrator in a professional setting, I'm confused by. But
I've found it's kind of an East Coast West Coast thing.
Is it
between InDesign and Illustrator? It seems like a lot of East Coasters prefer Illustrator. I don't know if it's like a
wait for book layout.
Well, no, book layout, that makes sense, but like I know people that are doing like vector stuff.
What?
Single page vector stuff in InDesign.
Nonsense.
I agree. It is complete nonsense.
I will take someone to the mat on that.
But everybody is entitled to their wrong opinion,
Like I'm all about empathy, but I don't empathize with those people. That ties into our conversation with on Artcasters. about conflict resolution and being empathetic and not otherizing people.
I
Um,
love
and
talking
I
about
agree with that, except for those people,
right.
those
Except for
those
guys,
people
except for them.
doing like, how dare anyone do? I'm sorry, I'm actually offended by that. Adam said my comic has been in print for months, but the website won't post it. That's frustrating.
Oh, that's
Well,
annoying.
Adam, on Facebook, if you can like just link me to like your, I'm just throwing this out there because if you have some prints, I would like to obtain a copy of that comic, of said comic. So if you can like message me like how I could possibly like send you payment for such a comic, I would like to know the details on that. Because website or not, like that would be cool. So let me know if that's possible. If that's not something you want to do till you launch, that's fine too. Not putting pressure on you, man. I'm just, curious about it. Yeah, that's really weird. I'm amazed by that. I could kind of understand it for like maybe if you're doing like a flyer. I don't know.
I mean, if it's very type based,
Yeah,
and you were, kind of came up through like a traditional, kind of Quark Express situation, or even just like a book layout, it's probably faster to do it's faster to use the wrong tool that you know better than the right tool that you don't know as well.
Did I share the recto verso conversation?
That doesn't ring a bell.
Okay, so when I first got the deal with Graphic Mundi for Jacobs, we were talking about some of the book layout. And the editor, Kendra, who's like a sweet, brilliant lady who's worked in print for a long time, and her day job is working with books. I mean, she's an editor, right? And she goes, well, on the recto side, like there's this, and then on the verso side. So are you saying you want this to start on the recto? Because I have an unusual title page in Jacobs. So that kind of presented some questions. And younger me would have pretended I knew what she was talking about and then got myself into a world of trouble. Older me, who's pretty seasoned in art and has worked on books and stuff, and knew enough to be like, I'm sorry, I have never heard that term before. What does that mean? And she's like, in the book world, like recto is right and verso is left. And I'm like, oh, okay. and then I like looked it up afterwards because I'm a nerd and I like obtaining information. And that's a common parlance in book design and layout and stuff. And I was like, that's really cool. So now I know a little bit of language that causes, because like this is one thing I love about art directing is like half your job is like navigating the divide between artist language and common parlance, right?
Oh yeah.
Like how do you translate sales language or ask them the right questions to kind of translate what they're asking for into your language and your team's language?
My uncle used to say that his job, he owned a video game production company. And he said, my job is to get the artists to talk to the nerds. Because I sit here and translate nerd to artist and artist to nerd. It's like, yeah, that makes sense.
And I have to say, the older I get, the more I'm like, we're all nerds.
Yeah.
We're all nerds.
But I mean,
yes,
we're not nerds like,
we're geeks. Sorry,
we're not nerds like
I used the wrong
programmers term. Are nerds, because there are people that are like, like I'm nerdy for a lot of things, but then some of my programmer friends, I'll be talking to them and I'm like, I can appreciate the enthusiasm you have for what you're saying, but I literally don't understand any of the words that are coming out of your mouth.
Yeah, it's kind of
like, sounds like you're making stuff up when you start talking about Ruby on Rails, Python, database structures. Like that just sounds like gibberish.
That's funny because one of my friends who's like super into like coding and stuff, he does like a YouTube channel where he'll be like, here's how I'm going to get Python to do this thing. And I'll watch like 5 seconds of it. And he's really entertaining, but it's like, it's really hard to access.
Yep.
Which makes me wonder if our show sounds like that to like, what should I call them? Muggles.
Yeah.
Like I wonder if the common muggle just kind of comes across and goes like,
What? Yeah. What are these guys talking about?
Yeah, because I definitely had moments like that when I taught college where I would use terminology that's like really obvious and used in industry all the time. And so I would just forget that it's something I didn't know at one point.
Right.
And I remember those moments of like somebody being like, what's this? Or like a student being like, what's a pixel? And I'm like, oh,
right.
Oh yeah, like I didn't actually know that. You know?
Yeah, at some point in time, somebody had to explain that concept to you.
Yeah, or like what's pixels per inch? Like just basic stuff, but it's like it makes sense because you have to learn at some point. And so like for like a finance guy or like a coder like talking to me, they're going to be like, oh, you just do the blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, what? Like, what is that?
Right.
But the recto verso thing I thought was cool knowledge to pass on because I was like, hey, if you're ever talking in negotiations with a publisher, you can borrow that.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Although what's funny is the publisher might be like, what does that mean? But the cool thing is then you're in the knowledge position where you're like, yes, let me explain to you what that means.
Let me explain to you your business.
Yeah. Let me walk you through what I just learned a week ago.
Right.
But anyhow, I thought that was cool. I didn't know, but there's like a long history to it.
Well, sometimes I wonder about stuff like that. I'm like, that's kind of cool, but also unnecessary and weird. And why are they still doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like a lot of stuff in design has a lot of origins and then just becomes part of the industry. It's the same with like there are so many acronyms like that are used in sales that just don't make any sense.
Right.
Or like terminology that you just are like no-nos in sales. Like you can't say cheap. If you say cheap, people think cheap. Like they think it's like cheaply made.
Right.
But so you have to say cost effective.
Right.
Which is saying it's cheap.
Right.
but it makes, I mean, it's like there's weird little things where it's like, you know, I don't know. It's fascinating. But yeah, I remember, like the uppercase, lowercase things kind of weird.
Right.
With type.
Well, a lot of typography stuff, I have to imagine, okay, like pioneer era graphic design, you know, like when Porter Rockwell was running around spinning in the middle of in a gunfight, there were dudes that were printing because they had different shelves full of type, and that's where uppercase and lowercase comes from.
And half of investing in a printer was like you'd be buying these like hand carved like
right.
like letters.
Yeah, it's like and so like you hear of like things and in the history it's like the worst thing you could possibly imagine, and you're listening to it and you're like, that doesn't seem like, and then they destroyed the press by taking the drawer full of type and scattering it in the street, and you're like, why don't you just pick it up? Like, but then that is either it's destroyed the set because you're missing like one letter, and then none of what you have is useful.
Yeah, or suddenly you can't do proper like kerning because you're missing your little kerning spacers.
Yeah. And then you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that's pretty devastating. Like if somebody just like removed your ability to use the R and the E and the L key on your keyboard. Like I don't know if you've ever had that, but that I did that one time with a phone where like I broke the screen enough to where like I couldn't type in the upper left hand. There's like 2 or 3 keys that like wouldn't let me type. and
Yeah.
it rendered the entire phone completely useless.
Yeah, as an avid coffee drinker, I've definitely had moments where I've spilled coffee on a keyboard and then like 2 days later found out that like the shift didn't work. Which, by the way, again, like a lot of people might be like, usually there's 2 shifts on a keyboard. What's the big deal?
Nope. It's
If you're
over.
doing data entry or you're doing in-house graphic design that's like fast paced,
Yeah.
the 2 seconds that you're saving in every shortcut is fundamental to hitting deadlines and being able to do your job. And so like a 2 second delay, a 15-second delay to like look to the keyboard to the section you're not programmed to just kind of do your shortcuts.
That's the end, man. That's devastating.
Yeah, that's annoying with a keyboard, man. The worst is when it's the space bar on an older keyboard. That tends to go out pretty quick. And that's really irritating because you'll be like working, even if you're not typing, it's like you're working in Illustrator and you can't zoom. And you're like, oh, son of a.
It's over. I can't do anything.
Yeah.
It's all over now.
The one thing I found hard about teaching was shortcuts because you program shortcuts into yourself so much that it's like I can't even think. Like I'm not even looking at my hands when I'm doing them anymore.
Right.
And so to have to like backtrack and try to kind of remember to articulate like I'm hitting control alt whatever, like it's hard. And like I remember having quite a few moments where I like thought, oh, this will be easy to teach, and then I'd have to like stop and like slow motion it.
Right.
But then by slow motioning it, I wouldn't be able to do the right one because it's like a just program skill where it has to be fast. So then I'd have to do it like fast and then pause.
Right. Fast and then look at your hands.
And then I'd be like, okay, it's it's these buttons. Anyhow, so have you struggled with that at all? Like,
I do it all the time. I'm actually watching Emily Gannell is teaching adjunct with me right now.
Nice.
And she's great and she's fast, and it's very funny to like have to call out to her and say, you just did 3 steps in a row without saying any words out loud. it's like you're not getting paid to do this quickly. You're getting paid to explain it to 30 people as you do it.
Yeah.
And she's like, she's gotten much better, but at the beginning of the semester it was like, oh yeah, I remember doing the exact same thing where something that takes me like 90 seconds takes you 7 minutes to do, because you have to say, and then you push this button and this is why.
And you always have your holdouts who are like, I'm just going to use the file thing. And then like halfway through the semester, they're like slower than every single person in the class who took the time to do the shortcuts.
I quiz them on it, so they lose points if they don't learn shortcuts.
Damn right.
And we even have like, I'm going like old school 80s cartoon, like kid show learning, where I'm like calling it out like Sesame Street and like, and what's the keystroke for this tool? And the whole class full of like 20-year-olds are like, V. I'm like, yeah. And then I want to switch to the white arrow tool. What's that one? A. And it's like, it's literally, if anybody came in, it would be really embarrassing, but because everybody's doing it and it's actually a really effective way of learning. It works really well. But I hope that nobody like outside of the class ever like walks in, because I don't want to like destroy like the student's confidence in like basically doing Sesame Street level like memorization.
Yeah, because like that's unfortunately that's like part of the rote learning part, and then like
you just have to, you gotta
there is some rote learning inevitably in learning. It's just making that fun and then trying to get into the stuff that's more impactful, which is the practice. Well, because even that, like you could memorize every shortcut, but to build the muscle, yeah, and also to build the muscles to do the shortcuts, that's more important,
Right, like, and that's where I front load all my classes to where we do all that stuff in the first 2 weeks.
Hell yeah!
And then we spend the rest of the time. I'm like, all right, make a project.
I love it.
And
So you
do
basically
it.
give them false confidence at the beginning, and then they see how hard it really is.
Well, and I tell them, you are going to learn this semester the difference between understanding something, knowing something, becoming someone who can do that thing, and becoming somebody who can explain what you just did. There are massive watershed leaps in between each one of those stages.
Yeah. You know who's incredible at explaining their process? I just watched a video on Gary's channel, Gary Hodges,
Oh, he's
where
so good.
he was
Yeah.
deep diving into one of his characters, and he gave like the backstory and the history of this character that he built for Dinosaurs versus Mars Bots.
Yeah.
And I watched him in that process, and I've noticed this also on streams and stuff. He doesn't like pre-script. He
Right.
might pre-script some of those the more deep dives into his own work on his own channel, but I can say he's that articulate in person. Like he's a very methodical, clear communicator, and it's a real I don't know. It's interesting because I feel like that is a gift. You know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also indicative of a level of understanding that, like knowing how to do something is significantly different than being able to explain that same thing to somebody who doesn't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, and then I think there's, that weird divide where you sometimes have like surgeons have this problem all the time where they know it so well that they just have no patience for it. So do physicists. So it's kind of why, like, one of the things about Neil deGrasse Tyson, like, at least, and maybe this is different because you might actually know some physicists, Corey,
Yeah.
at your school. But I've met physicists, and like most of them will never say that Neil deGrasse Tyson is a great physicist. Like
Right.
he's not like the highest respected physicist. He hasn't made like some massive discoveries in physics that have like shaped the world or anything. But one of the things that is unique about him and makes him like very revered is the fact that he can take a very complicated idea and boil it down in a way that like the common man can digest it.
Yeah.
And like so that's like a superpower for a physicist because like a lot of physics is just not easy to communicate like that, but communication is like half of your job, which I
Right.
guess all I'm doing here is promoting what you do, Corey.
Well, I appreciate it.
In communications, I'm just going to talk about the value of it, but it is interesting. I have trouble with that, and I'm having to be more conscious of it. Like Jacob's apartment, I'm still working on my pitch, trying to iron it out. And it is really hard to kind of there's so much thought that I've put into my comics and like years of labor.
Right.
So by the time I'm done to like go back and be like, okay, I made this decision to have this character have red hair to juxtapose with like the blue palette that I was using for this other main character. So it's kind of highlighting like they're like fire and water, like they're opposites,
Right.
And then there's like a fish theme that's always occurring with this character. So like there's a conversation sequence at the beginning that has like a fishbowl, and like going through that is such a weird process to like back plan and think about it. And it really makes me admire people who can off the cuff just really analytically like break something down in a digestible manner,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a skill for sure that you've got to like learn. And
it's kind of like sales in a weird way, but it's like selling your art and your ideas and not in like it's just part of I don't know, because you kind of have to sell whatever you're working on, and if you can't communicate it, it's going to be hard to sell it.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm not one of those guys that's like everything is sales. Like I hate the mentality of everything is sales. Because that's an argument that a lot of people make.
Oh no.
But I do think everything is communication. Like
I agree with the communication. I disagree with the sales because that like commodifies everything.
Right, exactly.
But yes, I agree. Like communication is huge. And you're right, like especially with conflicts, it's all communication with conflicts.
Yeah, that was. I hope everybody else found that episode interesting because
I thought it was cool.
I love talking to Brent. Like I probably bug him because any chance I get, I'm like, I'm gonna go talk to Brent. It's just like he's such an interesting thinker, and just like he's one of those guys who I love it when people are really into their thing, you know,
Yeah.
and like his thing is like human interaction, and like
Yeah.
and he reads up on it and he knows and he can rattle off the top of his head the different theories of it and the different things and like I love that I could talk to him today and say, hey, we're doing this thing, and he was like, is it a conversation or a presentation, because I don't have time to prepare. And I knew that he would be perfectly capable of me just saying, no, I'm just gonna throw some scenarios at you and you tell me what the right answer is. And he's like, oh, I can do that. And like he didn't do it in a way that was like, well, this is what my opinion is. It was like, I'm going to cite my sources and here's all the reasons and here's all the things and here's what the
Mm-hmm.
studies have said, and and this type of stuff. And anyway, I keep encouraging him to write that theory that he's got of like the three different types of people that you can't communicate with,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it's actually pretty unique from an academic standpoint.
Yeah, and if he makes it palatable, I think that would be like again, like the Neil deGrasse Tyson thing I was just saying, where
Right.
it's like there's so much benefit to that. If you make a palatable idea that's a complex idea and you break it down in a way that's easy to digest, like that's huge. I
Yeah.
think I found that conversation really great, and I always feel like it's a gift to talk to people who specialize in that, because especially conflict resolution, um, because it becomes so key. Like the higher up you get in like art or wherever, even in selling your products or like in marketing books or even in writing, like writing is communication too. So
Oh yeah.
it's and conflict is like inevitable. So I think that like I've benefited every time I kind of delve into that. And he listed like 10 books in that conversation that I'm like, I remember at the time I was initially going to write them down, and then I was like, oh, there's just too many. So I'm probably going to just have to rewatch this, which is interesting because I don't rewatch a lot of our Artcasters
Yeah.
episodes. Not that I don't like them. It's just, it's like a conversation I had. Reliving that,
Right.
isn't
Yeah.
something I always do.
Right.
But every once in a while, there's one that's just full of like so much good information. I'm just going to re-listen, and that's definitely one of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you read anything from the Arbinger Institute?
I don't know what the Arbinger Institute is,
So
so
they're
I
the
would
ones
want
that
to Google it.
it's a think tank that is their mission is to get empathetic connections between people, like to promote peaceful conflict resolution.
Huh.
And they've written those three books the main three books that he was talking about. One is The Anatomy of Peace, and the other one is Leadership and Self-Deception.
Huh.
And
Are th- are they
sorry, go ahead.
politically affiliated with anything, or?
They're probably more religiously affiliated than politically affiliated, but not
Oh, okay.
officially. Like they're not officially affiliated any particular way, but they're kind of like a Stephen Covey situation,
Oh, okay.
where it's like business consulting, but if you look really closely, it's like kind of biblical principles of business, or in their aspect, it's a very Christian way of communicating.
Okay.
Um, but on the surface, it's scientifically and research based.
Huh.
But they come at the research of like, I think this principle is true, and so let's test that theory.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
So,
Huh.
but yeah, they're very interesting, and I really like a lot of what they do and what they represent. But I'm not exaggerating that, like, reading Anatomy of Peace as a family was like a turning point in our ability to communicate as a family. It's very helpful.
That's cool.
And it's also one of those things where you have to go through that, like, moment of like, oh crap, I'm a horrible person. And then you realize, like, oh, everybody's a horrible person and we're all trying to be better. Like,
Yeah, I think that happens a lot, especially in like marriage communication courses or
yeah, right.
like books that are super helpful in those kind of things are always a little difficult. 'Cause usually, to have any sort of effective growth, you kind of have to face your own flaws,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
which is always a enlightening but also humiliating and humbling experience, which is kind of
Yeah.
cool.
Exactly. But I mean, there's one scenario that I was reading in one of those books, and it was like talking about that how you justify yourself, and Brent didn't get into it too much, but that term in the books is explained as like, if a wall is wrong, you have to justify it. Like, if you hang a door incorrectly, it's got to be justified, which is either like compensating for its wrongness by building other structures around it to compensate, or or like doing things to the room that make it right, but you're not actually fixing the problem, you're kind of like masking the problem. And so it's the same thing. It's the same thing with us. Like, if I am angry at somebody, like, I have to justify that anger.
Yeah, let's use an example like that would make you really angry. Like let's say I decide I'm gonna do an illustration and I'm just gonna pull open this InDesign. And I'm just gonna do one single illustration. And so
I'm gonna use the pen tool very heavily in InDesign for no particular reason.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna keep like the preview at like a really low resolution too. I'm just gonna
right. Yeah. So, people who do that, those people. But anyway, yeah. So to do that type of thing, you have to make yourself feel like you are right by skewing the rest of the world, or like lying about your perception of things. And when you do that, you are at war in that particular aspect. And if you encounter a situation when you're at peace, then it doesn't become a contentious situation. But if you're at war, then you will seek enemies and allies. Like, you'll start telling the story to everybody to try to gain people to your side. You will look for ways to further justify your negative emotions about that person. Like, you will create enemies and allies. But a person at peace doesn't seek enemies and allies because they're not in a fight. They don't need people on their side and people not on their side. There's just people. Anyway, it's a fascinating concept. And like, from a family structure, you don't really think of, like, in a good functioning marriage and a good functioning family, like, I would never consider my wife an enemy, but there are times when I think and feel and behave in that way, and if I'm not aware of that, then that becomes a problem. But if I'm like, oh, I'm at war right now, I need to become at peace, and then the same situation is just like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. Like, she didn't get any sleep last night because our infant got her vaccinations this morning and or yesterday, and so I empathize with that, and it's fine. And whatever she just said that would have pissed me off if I was at war, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, and what's great is it also like I haven't read that book, but I kind of agree with that approach because it's like a good example. Like my wife has like a bunch of illustrations.
Right.
I'm having to do these panels like awfully late at night,
Yeah.
And so we're having to kind of compromise, and it's like I'm still helping with Ben, but I'm also like having to, out of like necessity, like I have to crash when I get home for like an hour,
Right.
just to have like the ability to be able to kind of sustain what I'm doing,
Right.
to get these books done.
Yep.
And she has other things that she's having to kind of work through, and we're kind of empathetic to each other, but also it's very frustrating, I think, for her, like, because I've definitely been in her position, not currently, but I remember like before I got my gig as an art director, it was one of those like humiliating moments where I was like out of work and we had like a kid.
Right.
Well, I wasn't out of work, I was actually adjuncting and freelancing, but it just wasn't like
Wasn't
making
enough money.
what it
Yeah.
needed to. And so I ended up kind of being the caregiver for like, the first like 3 months or whatever, like the kind of stay at home with my son. Obviously not the first like month, but for like 2 or 3 months. I think till he was like 4 months old, which I now value. At the time it was very frustrating.
Yeah.
But it was cool to have that like bonding.
Yeah.
Because a lot of dads don't get that opportunity, and it was really cool to have that. And it's really, I know it's a cliche, but that's like a blessing later on.
Oh yeah.
And also it helps you empathize. So I know that like I remember vividly, like there were days where I would be watching Ben like for the whole day, and it's like a weekend, and my wife would get home from work, and like 5 minutes before she was about to get home, I'd be like, I need to hand this kid
Right.
to someone for like a minute and just like sit down alone for like a minute,
Yeah.
And she'd get home and she'd have other things she needed to do. And I remember being like, just feeling this tension and this anxiety. And I'm not saying that's always like, my wife's actually a lot better of a person than I am, but I'm just saying like, because of that, I know that like for her to even let me do a nap is like a big compromise, which is
Right.
kind of awesome. But we do that for each other. And
Yeah.
a lot of it's that kind of like putting ourselves in each other's shoes. I think she's better at it than I am. I still am a little more selfish, I think, between the two of us. But it is interesting when you start kind of thinking more from those terms. Like part of why I've been like doing deep cleaning too is just like I have a weakness of like not cleaning. And it's because I'm kind of like, and this is not, see, this does sound like a justification, but it's a reality. When I clean something, I'm going to like hardcore clean it. Like I'm not going to, I can't do like partial.
Right.
But I realized like I don't know, it was like a month ago. This is a more recent one, but I was just realizing like I've let a lot of the house cleaning duties like rest on my wife's shoulders, and that's not cool,
Yeah.
Like I mean, it does make sense considering our scenario where she's like a stay-at-home mom. I'm doing 9 to 5 and all that, but at the same time, I can contribute more than I am. So
Right.
And I was like, considering the way I do clean, how could I do that? How could I show that I want to contribute to like helping with this? And I realized like I can just deep clean a section and then just do a spot, like a quick thing over what I've already deep cleaned, and then just get a section done. And it'll be just like my graphic novels where it's like you just kind of do a little bit at a time and then you're done.
Yeah.
And then you probably have to start over. But point being like, in doing that, again, that was a compromise because I don't have that time, but like I also know how my brain works, where if I make something a habit, I will make time.
Right.
And so I just like worked with that to kind of make that happen. I'm not trying to brag. I'm just, because I don't think it's worth bragging about. It's not that big of a thing, but it's it does stem from a lot of that. Like you need to empathize with the people you're with, and try to put yourselves in their shoes and understand like what their struggles are and stuff. Because quite often the reason you're getting cut off on the freeway isn't because like the person hates you. It's because they're in a rush and they aren't thinking about you. You know, like similar thing. Like, you know, in relationships, like a lot, you know, like marriages that are even healthy, it's like you're still going to have a day where you're just not like in the best mood. And it doesn't always have to do with the other person. It might have to do with like, maybe in the morning you went to get the mail and the mailman punched you in the face. I'm
you
just,
live in an
that
interesting
was a
neighborhood.
very extreme example, but you know.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, there's, yeah, the idea that everything is about you is, it's funny to realize like, oh, actually, you know, everybody's dealing with their own stuff and very little of this is directly related to me. You know,
it's so encouraging.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like we work really hard to kind of, I don't know, like make ourselves believe that we're kind of the main character in our own story, and it's fascinating to and freeing to just kind of be like, yeah, I'm not the center of the universe here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting.
And it's also a weird thing because I think it's definitely something that requires a lot of practice, and because of the fact that like innately, like, you know, like I have to make an effort, you know, if I'm like trying to get to know you, Corey, to like try to get to know you, because I have no idea. You know, I have my thoughts, and that's all I have.
Right.
And so it really does require some curiosity and interest to kind of get to know people or to like try to consider other perspectives, because we are kind of locked in this scenario where we can, I mean, the beauty of human beings is we can imagine, you know, and that's kind of, I don't know, kind of like, I guess what's based on how that like kind of conflict stuff can tie into art too, because it all hinges on our imagination too.
Yeah.
You have to be able to kind of imagine scenarios where people aren't all evil.
Yeah. One thing I love about teaching the communication department as opposed to the art department, not that I have anything against the art department, but like the types of classes that Brent teaches are in the core requirements for all the students. So like if you want to be a comm graduate from our program, you have to take a class called interpersonal communication, where it's basically the entire class is like, let's figure out how to empathize with human beings. And it's like that is a college required course. And so it's cool that you know that I get to teach you like Illustrator and graphic design principles and all this stuff, but at the same time you also have to learn how to like be a person in this world. And it's not something that comes naturally to people. And so I love that that's like part of our curriculum. It's like one of my favorite things.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really essential for storytelling to build your empathy too, because, and also to build your empathy for evil. Like, I know this is weird, but it's like, if you write it, unless you're writing a force of nature villain, you're going to have to actually get in like a villain's head if you're writing like, say, an action comic or something, right?
Yeah.
And in order to get into a villain's head, you have to be able to read history about villainous things that have been done. And you have to be able to like put yourself in the worst human being's mind and try to think, okay, they're like, I might view them as a monster, but they don't probably view themselves as a monster, right? So like, they probably have their own justifications for what they're doing, and like start thinking like, okay, what's that mindset? And you kind of actually have to step into that. It's an interesting thing, but it's like, I could imagine it being really hard to do without empathy.
Oh yeah.
I think that's slightly one of the weaknesses of a lot of objectivist writing, because you'll find that a lot of objectivist writing has really shallow, flat characters that
Right.
that have pretty transparent, obvious motives, which tend to be a little, I don't know, like I feel like lack depth, you know?
Right. And that's because like Mother Teresa, you know, she was thinking like one day, like, I need to figure out how I'm like Hitler. And she felt that she gained a lot in her spirituality by realizing that we all have a monster inside of us and that any one of us could be, you know, could think along the lines of Hitler if we didn't like keep in check our more base desires and things. And so
Yeah.
if you're an objectivist and you think that there are some people that are just geniuses and they're inherently better than the rest of us, it's really shallow writing, because where's the struggle? Like Ayn Rand's heroes are the most automaton robot like, hard to grab. I mean, like, even in the way that
Well,
they
they're more
live.
rational than people are. Like, I mean, I'm not saying she's rational. I'm just saying, like, um,
They
this is
think
another
they,
thing.
yeah,
Another thing you kind of start realizing about people is even rational people don't tend to come to rational conclusions
right,
based on rationality. Like, there's usually a drive that goes far beyond rationality that makes them look. Um, and so it's like this really interesting thing where there's ways to rationally work through things. That's why the scientific method is so brilliant, because it has control groups and like peer review and
yeah,
like a lot of counterbalancing to like our inherent biases, which the most rational of processes like understood was a problem. You know, they're like, okay, we have these biases. How do we design this so it can override our bias, right?
right,
Um, but the point being, like, the pursuit of any kind of thought tends to start with emotion, and then it moves to rationality. And so, like, the idea of these like cold, just totally rational characters is fairly unbelievable, even for cold, rational people. Like,
yeah,
um, I don't know. Anyhow,
yeah. No, it's very hard to look at any of those characters and be like, oh, I see me in them.
yeah,
Unless you're, I mean, when I was reading that stuff, I was in the conceit of youth. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
you have
It
that.
definitely made sense to me when I was in like seventh grade.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, it made more sense because I didn't read it in seventh grade, but it made a lot of sense when I was 25. You know, because you also kind of think you're invincible and that you're, you know, way better than you are, and
Yeah,
you know, and so like the idea, you know, the idea that you could, you know, the idea that you are so good at something that you could change the world rather than your little sphere of influence seems very reasonable. so, so you come across somebody like Reardon and you're like, yeah, I'm kind of like that guy. You know? And then later you realize that there's like your brain finishes developing and you realize like the gray and the nuance of the world because you actually have the neurological ability to comprehend nuance, whereas you didn't in your early 20s. And you're like, oh, gray, nuance, and muddy stuff rather than everything being black and white. And you're like, that guy is a really unrelatable character.
yeah, yeah. But I think yeah, I don't know. I find that really fascinating and interesting. You know,
Yeah.
I will say I'm starting to need to just call it. I
Oh,
was hoping
really?
to finish two panels, but I think I might have to stick to the one I initially went. Although you're kind of close, right? On that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a very simple coloring in this, and I should be. I bet I could finish in 10 minutes. That's my goal. So
Okay, I'm gonna take another brief break, and then I'm gonna meet you with that, and I will hang with you till you finish that. Don't feel pressured, because this is actually a good way for me to psychologically get myself to get further, which I need to. So I'll be right back in about 20 seconds.
Cool.
And Adam said a more subtle villain with redeeming qualities and a reason for turning evil can be very compelling. Yeah, agreed. And I like the fact that if you write really well with empathy, even if you write a force of nature villain, a good example of that is like No Country for Old Men. That force of nature villain is terrifying because all the other characters are written so empathetically that it makes this like unstoppable murderer in it just like the most frightening, chilling thing on earth. I think that's a really good example of like even doing force of nature characters in juxtaposition with really empathetic characters is like super powerful.
Yeah.
So anyhow, okay.
All right, so let's do this. And then I'm going to do my fill under button. Excellent. I missed that for some reason. So we can color that in. I don't even want to look at what time it is right now. I'm trying to do these really fast, and so far I have not been able to do them very fast. Let's go here and go fill under. Oh, and if we're using yellows and browns, what kind of background makes sense? Let's see what we've got here. Let's do like a washed down blue.
So I have a conflict resolution book suggestion.
Yeah.
It's one that helped me out a lot. It's actually called Verbal Judo.
Oh, interesting.
And it was written by like a guy who trained police officers on how to get compliance without force.
Oh, okay.
And it's really compelling because a lot of it does stem from empathy as well, and then also demeanor, posture, and it's like I found it really useful, like as a manager. Not that I'm going to manage like a cop or anything, because he's not a cop. I think he was like an ex-cop, and he was kind of horrified by like some of the more draconian measures of like getting compliance, and it's very useful. It's kind of like, I mean, there's also the go-to standard, which is like How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is again like a book that kind of on its face sounds like it's just about benefiting, but
yeah, the title of that book has always been fairly off-putting to me.
Yeah, 100%. But like the whole premise of it is like, show genuine interest in people,
right?
Like own your faults, like lean into discomfort, like, just a lot of like basic tried and true things, which I think again, like it's great to have like reminders of those, And the weird thing is, this is one of the things I love about like truthful things is like generally when someone speaks truth, like if somebody tells me like, hey, that eyeball's off, and I've spent, 20 hours on a drawing and I managed to not draw my through line, it's like I can justify it all I want, but like the eyeball is off. I know it. Like with the second someone says it, there's a part of me, and I really strongly believe this is in a lot of people. It's like there's a part of you that knows,
right? Yeah,
and that's why you jump to justify. Like, it's that part of you that like when you hear truth and you're not near truth, you feel a need to defend. And however, I also want to say, just because someone's justifying doesn't always mean they aren't telling the truth or that they're doing something nefarious. Like there's definitely a case for like you should be able to justify what you believe, and you should be able to justify your actions. But the great thing about good actions is generally good actions don't require much justification.
Yeah, and I would argue that there's explaining and there's justification. Like if you were explaining your motives and reasons for doing things, I don't necessarily think that's, I don't know, because I think I don't know if you can justify yourself, like actual justify. I think you can rationalize, and I think you can go through whatever mental gymnastics and hoops it takes to convince yourself that you're in the right or whatnot. But like I think to a certain extent, you have to be justified by an outside force.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Christian, so I believe in that. But it's like, I also think, I think actions need justification, and I think in reflection to that, like I think that's how things work. Like, I'm trying to think of a case in point of this. There are times where there is terrible action that is justified. A good example would be like, it's such a bad example actually, and it might be interesting to talk about because I don't actually know where I stand on this. I come from a long line on one side of my family of like Mennonites, like way back in our history, and I kind of think some of that might be in my DNA. One thing that was really unique about Mennonites was they were like completely nonviolent. Like they actually thought it was a sin to like commit violence even in self-defense.
Right.
I don't know where I stand on it because I feel like, you can protect your family and friends and things like that, and that can be very justified. That's what I think on a base level.
Yeah.
There is also a part of me that almost feels like it might actually be better to not, which is so hard to like even consider like as a parent, because it's like if somebody messed with my kid, like I will probably get violent. Like,
right. It's gonna be hard to.
Yeah, I mean, just innately, it's like in my blood to do that. It's like my instinct, but it's an interesting thought exercise. I don't know, like where it's like tying into what you were saying about nothing being really fully justified without an external source is interesting because even in that case, I don't know if that really justifies it. It's really interesting. that rabbit hole, but I like it. And I consider it, and I'm not sure where I fall on that. Like philosophically, biblically, like I find that one a really, really interesting can of worms.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I don't know, because I mean, I'm kind of the same. I'm all for self-defense. I think self-defense is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But
is it?
Also, well, at the same time,
that's the part.
I'm also like, but who am I to judge? My betterness over somebody else's, whatever. My physical well-being over their physical well-being or whatnot. I don't know. It's an interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Conundrum.
And this is like a relatively fresh one for me because I used to be very like pro death penalty.
Right.
And in the last like 5 or 6 years, I've totally switched on that. Where I feel like I just don't feel like it's I don't know, it just seems so hypocritical.
Yeah. It's hard to be pro anything that is part of the prison industrial complex.
Yeah, 100%. And again, like it kind of ties into like that when I was hardcore pro it, I was a young young man.
Right.
And then I started seeing the nuance.
Well, and it's such an easy Hollywood solution. Like you're
Yeah.
kind of trained in the States to like justifiable death, like as a storytelling thing. You're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, well, he did that thing, so it's okay for the hero to kill him,
Yeah.
you know, and we're fine with it. And like when it doesn't happen, sometimes we're like, no, but he should die. Like as a storytelling element. It's like
Yeah.
it's like if that were real life, this would be a huge problem. Like this hero, quote unquote, is just going around like
Killing people.
killing people without a judge and jury and without a whatever. Like it's kind of baked into our storytelling of like, no, yeah, that's deserving of death.
Yeah, because I feel like we devalue human life like all the time.
Yep.
And like it's a hard thing to wrestle with, like because I also understand the need for like a justice system and for rules of law
Yeah.
and for
Oh, absolutely.
consequences. But it's like it's interesting how I've ended up in a territory where um, for the way that I run my own life, I do question whether any violence is justified. And I think there's actually a pretty decent basis for that. um, Although I don't know if I could stand by that standard, you know?
Yeah, my problem is, there is evil in the world, and that whole, for good men to do nothing situation is a pretty moral and logical argument.
Oh, I agree with that too. That's the conundrum.
Right.
And because I think this is also storytelling fodder, just to tie it into comics too. Um, but it's like a comedy of errors quite often like rests on like people trying to do good things and they aren't even doing villainous things. But by doing the good thing, it sets in motion terrible things.
Right.
Like a good example would be like I dislike Monsanto or something. I'm just throwing it out there. So
Sure.
because Monsanto is a great target, they're a terrible company, but they're everywhere and we all buy them whether we know it or not. In pretty much whatever country we're in, like they're
Yeah.
just massive. They have their tentacles and everything. Big food.
There we go. Big food. The big food
But
conspiracy.
but anyhow, like so if I try to like not buy Monsanto and I'm trying to be a really good consumer, and so I decide to buy some organic like thing that somehow isn't using Monsanto, but in the process of buying that, maybe it's like a plant that causes a certain bug to proliferate in an area, and that
Right.
bug by proliferating is actually causing like the death of more animals than like Monsanto, or like causing the destruction of more farms than Monsanto.
Right.
Or I decide I'm going to buy American products because I want to support local manufacturing, but half the American products I'm buying are using components and metal sourced from China. Um, or I decide to do that, and then it causes a factory in China to close, and then half the people in the factory like go starve, and so I've assisted in causing the starvation of a bunch of different people. It's so crazy and complex and nuanced. Like the idea of doing right in this world is like you can very well do all the right things and cause like complete chaos, and not even be like a standard kind of like villain in a story. So it's interesting because it's like we're all walking in like wakes of like these strange consequences from our actions that we don't really have a ton of control over, and it's very
And
fascinating.
it's almost like medical consent,
Yeah.
where it's like the likelihood of you having the ability to even comprehend what you're saying yes to, is like is so far out there, that it's silly. It's like there's so many moving parts. Like you're saying, like all these butterfly effect things are great examples because it's like there's so much to that it's like, how do we even know? You can try to be good and you can try to, try to do the right thing, but I mean, like, you know, NFTs are an interesting example. Like, are they actually killing the environment, or is that a huge overreaction? And I mean, is there a difference between that and everybody driving around a combustible engine? You know, I mean, like, there's just all kinds of, like.
And then if there isn't a difference, does that make it any better? Like, that's the other
Yeah,
thing. Like,
right.
where
Yeah,
it's
do you weigh that?
like we'll often get comparative with stuff, but we won't even just acknowledge like I don't know. Like I hear comparative stuff a lot too, and that's very much a justification where it'll be like, well, other people, blah blah blah, or like it's not as bad as like a good example. People always bring up cows, where they're like, this isn't like the car is not nearly as bad as like one cow. Like one cow is emitting way more like toxic nonsense into the environment, which is slightly true. But still, what does that mean? Does that mean we shouldn't try to do anything? Like,
so does that justify your behavior? Yeah.
but then it's so weird. Like
It's like, well,
recycling
I
is a good
killed that guy,
example.
but like Hitler killed way more people than I just did.
Yeah, it's funny. We're actually touching on topics. I'll recommend this book. My friend Alan Noble wrote a book called "You Are Not Your Own," and
Yeah.
it's a book that comes from a very religious perspective. So I will say, like, if you're not it's not written for people who don't believe in a god of any kind. So, but if you do believe in a higher power, like I think that the book makes a really compelling case for like all of the different things people try to do in a world that's not designed for them.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. But like one of the examples he used that I thought was really fascinating about like our kind of absurd attempt to like try to kind of make things better here is like recycling, where it's like recycling is this positive thing. It's definitely a good thing to do. But then when you start finding out that there's like this subculture to recycling where we're causing like a lot of third world countries to just be like trash piles. And a lot of them won't even take our recycling anymore because they can't process it. So we're just creating dumps on a different continent by recycling. Like it's doing no, like to an extent, some of it's doing no better than the trash that we were trying to solve in the first place. And it's a weird thing where it's like you try to do the right thing, you try to recycle, you try to do the right thing there, and even there you might be just like putting a thing in a bin that ends up like, you know, it's a really depressing thought though, so we can switch topics too. but I just find it really fascinating. You know, where and then there's all sorts of people who even question whether we have agency at all. And that's interesting too.
Yeah.
I think that for society to function, we have to accept that we have agency.
Right.
But it is interesting, like the idea of like if you were put, like a lot of us, if we were switched in different circumstances, would come out very differently.
Right.
It's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's interesting actually. Let us know in the chats. Adam, are we off the rails at this point? Get us back on the rails, man.
If we're Adam had an interesting concept or comment where he said, "I find that moral dilemma is very interesting. We are in an industry where the good guys killing the bad guys is a standard, but do we really agree with the morality of that? You know, I don't like military wars in real life. It's hard to write an epic story on the scope of Lord of the Rings and Star Wars without something like that." So, and it is interesting. I was back to Brent and what he was saying. His thing of like, you can really tell a lot about somebody by their by their metaphors. There are so many war and battle metaphors that we use in language. It's amazing. You know, and like getting in the trenches, and it's like, you know, that type of even just in marketing speak, when we say things like target audience, that's always bothered me, that we're like, you know, targeting people, we're blasting people with emails, we're, you know, it's like.
But I mean, you know, and I tend to like some capitalism. I've told you this multiple times, but
Yeah,
it's like I think there need to be
like
social systems in capitalism, but I generally think capitalism's like the best of I think not pure unadulterated capitalism. That would
Right.
be disgusting. But I think capitalism is a good solution.
Yeah.
As good of a solution as we have so far, counterbalanced with some social programs, but that being said, like capitalism is very war based.
Yeah.
I mean, capitalism is war just with consumption.
Right.
And so, like, war analogies in business are fascinating because business is very war strategy. I mean, obviously, you probably don't want to go full out war with your strategy but even with war strategy, you don't want to go full out war all the time, right? You need your allies and
Well, total war, when you talk about total war, that's a huge problem.
yeah.
It's where you get everyone in society sacrificing themselves, for the for the state or whatever, and you've got women and children, and the elderly, strapping explosives in themselves. I mean, becoming weapons. I mean, like total war is, there's a huge issue.
Yeah,
But
100%. Well, there's
anyway,
issues
yeah,
with war in general, but it is
war.
fascinating how much of our society is like kind of, whether by necessity or not, like kind of based on war.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a trip. And I think some of that comes from war too, like the kind of even thoughts a lot of us have about self-defense might even be my thoughts on self-defense, where it's like, well, hey, it's survival, like
Right.
survival of the fittest kind of thing. It's interesting. It's fascinating. And I don't think there's easy solutions, but I definitely it's weird. I like opening those Pandora's boxes because I don't know, but some of that might be because I'm a depressive. So I can.
Well, I think I'm close to being done. This is not my favorite thing I've done, but
I think it's pretty good, man.
It's fine. Like I said, it's not my favorite. I don't think it's bad, but I'm just gonna thin some of these out.
All right.
Weird. And then I think I'm gonna call it.
So I have to stop apologizing for rambling. That's something I've been called out on.
Yeah.
And you definitely need to get better at just owning when something's done and it looks good.
I didn't say it looked bad, but
You're like,
I'm very pleased with many of the faces that I've done recently, and I'm not very pleased with this one. So I'm just calling a spade a spade. I'm not downplaying my successes. I'm really happy with some of the things I've done recently in the last couple of days, but this one's just okay, and I'll probably delete it later.
I don't know. I think it looks good. I think if you possibly, like, I would think the one thing that might punch it up a bit is just to put a little more interest in the background. I think if there's something, what might be kind of crazy cool, is like a sky, like a very like vivid sky.
I might just toss a photograph back there. That's always a.
Yeah, I mean, it could be like it doesn't have to be like this. Especially if it's like really blown out, like it's almost like cloudy or something.
Yeah,
but I kind of feel like that might punch it up a little bit. But I think the shape is strong and the details are good and they're minimal, which is kind of good.
Which makes sense since like nature designed it. I'm really just going off of this actual bug that I have.
I love that. I think that's one of the fun things about working from the things we observe. All right, guys. Well, thank you to everybody who hung out in the stream, everybody who's watched this after the fact too. We really appreciate you guys. And Adam, I'm looking forward to getting that link too. Adam also said free will versus determinism is very interesting. Yeah, it is. And it's like, I think there's a general consensus among people that regardless of how you feel as a determinist, if you are a determinist in the slightest, you still have to embrace the fact that there's free will just for society to function. Because if we all just embraced determinism, then like we can kind of, I don't know, it sounds like a chaotic scenario. Yeah, I feel like that actually does kind of work. Holy crap. I like when I have moments of being slightly right.
Yeah.
I'm right and you're wrong, Corey.
Yep. Now what?
Oh, and then Anil, wait a minute. I'm
Anil.
Anil, like tunnel. I'm remembering this. Anil has joined us again, and welcome back. And I promise I will work on that until I get that pronunciation dead on every stream. And then, yeah, she said, looks great with the sky background. So that's pretty cool. I agree. I think it gives it
Good. That was good.
Because I think it's because it's the silhouette with the minimal detail, and then
right, because it almost looks backlit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
I think that
I'm just gonna.
Nicely done. All right, guys. Well, so if you aren't following Corey yet, follow Corey. Go watch Artcasters. It was his first time hosting it on his channel, so make sure you go check that out on Corey Kerr's channel. Make sure you are subscribed to Corey on Instagram, and also make sure you go buy 2 stories. And also check out Jacob's Apartment, my other graphic novel that's coming out in May of 2022. And thanks for hanging with us. We did 2 live streams today. I'm pretty excited about that. So I don't know how excited I'll be in the morning. Or I should say in a couple hours, but since it is the morning. But I appreciate you guys hanging with us, and Anil said, Corey remembered. Cheers, Corey. See? Right? Nicely done.
Well, it was written, and then for some reason that seeing it written, I was like, oh yeah, and then that like stuck in my head.
Yeah, like, and I have a poor memory, but I had to remember the tunnel, and the second I thought tunnel, I'm like, okay, right. Yeah, I remember that.
But it's interesting because I didn't remember the concept. I remember what it looked like in the comment. So I visualized the comment and saw the word tunnel without the T, and I was like, oh, there it is.
I love it. Did you do that in 3D, Corey? Or I'm just kidding. That's another callback to our previous conversation. So on Artcasters, which you guys should check out tomorrow or something like that. All right, guys. Have a good night, and we'll see you on the next live stream. I appreciate all of you. It's super fun doing these, and yeah. All right. Bye.